So in the previous lesson, we learned how to use foliage tools of both types. We haven't touched on procedural foliage. That is an experimental feature currently. This is something that when it comes out of experimentation, I'll likely do an additional tutorial for, but for the time being, we're going to ignore it. Instead, for this presentation, what we're going to be focusing on is how to actually build an arena that we're going to have for our game. So to do that, what I'm going to need to do is create a new level. And for the time being, I'm going to use default again. Just going to save my existing map just as a backup. But from here, if I delete this ground, I'm also going to, for the time being, just move this up a little bit. So wherever I am, I'm going to start in the air, but that's okay. I'm going to go landscape, and I'm going to set the landscape up in much the same way I had before, which was 2x2 and 4x4. I'm now going to create, and this is our base landscape. So for this, we're going to have a basic arena that exists in this area with the landscape kind of pushing up towards the edges. So how do we do that? I'm going to go sculpt, and I'm going to set this up to be a standard sculpt with quite a large brush. And I'm just going to paint this around the edges. So everything's going to kind of push back into this. Now that I've done this though, and I've got my basic area set up, I'm going to quickly go and set my light source to be movable so that we can more easily see things without those lines. And now I'm going to get my flatten tool. So I'm going to set these up as cliff faces. Again, you're welcome to take your own approach to this section, but it's better to try and adhere generally to the structure that I'm setting up. So now that I've done that, I'm going to set up a flatten tool to kind of have a harder edge across the top. I'm just going to run through that very quickly. Just want to make sure that everything is at least at this point. Cool. And now from here, it's a good idea for me to go through and set up some erosion. That's to kind of carve away at this and make it look a little bit more interesting. I'm going to turn my tool strength down whenever I'm using erosion. I'm going to increase my brush size, and I'm going to set my fall off to be more substantial so we don't get as jagged a line as we do it, as we were just saying. So I'm just going to go through and just erode this a bit to kind of get a little bit more of a hill. It's also a good idea for me to do a general erosion pass that's kind of following the ground itself, so make sure that it's not perfectly flat. I'm getting some brush strokes kind of becoming a bit too strong there. So this is going to be the rough outer for my environment. I'm going to grab a couple of areas like this that are kind of nooks, and I'm going to do a hydro erosion pass on them. So from here, I'm going to go through and push in for some hydro erosion. Just so we can kind of push out some of those sections so they create far more substantial kind of dips in the environment as they go down the edges. That'll do it for the time being. If you want to do your own thing and kind of break this out further, feel free. Generally what I wanted to do was have a simple flat environment that will be our gameplay area, and some walls kind of along the edges that'll look a bit nicer as we kind of move our camera around, that we'll see as being an area that we can't quite penetrate through. We'll flesh that out in just a bit, but what we're going to do next is we're going to make sure that we've got a basic sculpt set up, so like this. And we're going to start actually going through our landscape and meshing it out. So initially, I'm just going to quickly reapply the material that we had already created. And don't forget, after doing so, you can go to Paint, and you can right-click on the layer that you want to be there by default. In my situation, I want the dirt to be the default layer, and I'll paint everything else in. So if I go to dirt, I can then... Oh, first off, you need to create your your weight layer info. We've already done that though, so I'm just going to apply the dirt layer info that we had, which is in landscape assets. So once that's on, you can right click and I can just fill layer with dirt. And that should fill up everything with dirt. We can see that it's the nice dirt that we created in the previous session, so it's got the tessellation happening as well. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting in my grass layer. Because I'm zoomed so far out, the grass isn't actually visible until I pull my camera in. Also, because our strength is quite low, it takes a while for it to kind of get to the point where it's allowing it. So initially I'm going to crank my strength up again and just quickly kind of paint out this area as being grassy. At which point I'm going to go to my dirt layer and I'm going to remove it so that we kind of end up with almost entirely grass in these mixes here. It's a good idea to go through and kind of like add little patches of dirt though that are just kind of sitting around to break it up somewhat. So given our camera is going to be typically around this height, I think this will work reasonably well. Fantastic. So this LOD distance could be a bit aggressive on the grass. It's a good idea for you to kind of tweak this to your own environment. Again, this is one of those things that changes between projects, so working out where you want it to be is pretty important. At the moment it's set to 10,000. I'm just going to turn up to 15. So it just goes for a while longer. Our camera's never really going to be aiming in this direction though. It's always going to be typically aimed about here. So I think we'll be okay. So that's going to be our rough landscape. We're going to go through and remove grass as we need to, but for the time being, this is what we'll have. Now, with this in mind, let's start actually laying out the meshes. So I'm going to go to my environments and I'm going to start laying out assets.